Here's a hot take. I hate bases. Before I get into why that is, I'm going to update you on my Ratman warband from One Page Rules. So far I have 6 warriors, 3 monks, 3 grenadiers, a biker, a general, and an engineer. This month though, I'm going to be adding 2 more models, a couple of veterans with swords. While I feel like the halberds would have been more classic, I just can't get over how knightly these guys look with their ornate swords that are almost twice the size of them, so I had to go with them. So while I paint these guys' armor and some non-metal metal, starting with ultramarine blue, black, and white, I'll explain a little about why I hate bases. Reason number 1 actually comes from working on these videos. You may have noticed that some of my final shots have bases and some don't. Well, that's because it's so easy for them to become an afterthought, I forget to deal with them along the way. Either I forget to print one with a miniature at all, or forget to prime it when I prime the miniature, or by the time I get the model and video finalized, it's so dang late in the week that I don't want to bother doing up a base for the model and just take pictures without it. So that's my current annoyance from them. The rest of my dislike for them comes down to their disproportionate weight in what makes a well-painted miniature. At least how much they used to. It's changed a bit since, but we all know grudges are hard to get rid of. And for this story, we've got to go back to the era of 3rd edition 40k. Back then, the only source of getting your painting ego stamped down and grinded away was Cool Mini or Not, and boy, did it stomp down with some heavy boots. But one thing I started to notice about the models at the top was that they all had way over the top bases. Plinths with massive trees and set pieces, 2, 3, or 4 times the size of the actual model. Sometimes the model's paint job wasn't even that good, but was still getting a 10 out of 10 for pretty much the base. And this wasn't even limited to display painting. At one of the grand tournaments I went to, better painted armies, in my opinion, were getting less painting score than those who just had the most ridiculous bases. In one army, every single model was just glued to a rock. Not painted rocks, just rocks. Another had so much styrofoam on each base that every model was a good extra 3 inches off the table. Like each model had their own tiny cliff that just followed them around. To me, it just always looked a little bit silly, but apparently I was alone in this sentiment. So being the good little scientist I was, I decided to test a theory, as I was painting minis for a friend to sell on eBay around that time. Now to be clear, I'm a much better painter now than I was back then. And even now I get some people telling me I'm not that great, but I was still pretty good. So I took 2 of the same model, 2 Night Lord champions, and painted them at the same time the exact same way. They were for all intents and purposes identical. One I based modestly. I had lava running through the middle of the base and just painted sand on either side of it. You know, still nice, but usable for a game. The other I put on a larger base with a mound for the sand and lava flow, but also added a very large wood chip, taller than the model, that I painted as a stone and put a chaos symbol on. It's a very little extra effort, just larger. They went up for auction at the same time. No minimum bid or buyout prices, anything like that, just pure bid wars. And the one with the fake rock on its base went for 4 times the price as the normally based one. 4 times the amount. While it was more effort, sure, it wasn't 4 times the effort. This is when I knew that it didn't matter how good my painting was, if my base game wasn't on par or better. Thankfully, that trend has kind of died down a little bit since then, and I see people value a painted model for the model more than what it's standing on. Much like I kind of valued Rackham's models at the time, because they just stuck it on a pure black base and let the painting stand for itself. But there's still hints of it at the high end. Hand-painted backdrops have snuck their way into painting competitions now, so because I don't know how to paint 2D, I feel like I shouldn't even bother. But at least in most of those cases, the models are also actually the standout, and wonderfully done too, so it isn't the backdrop carrying the model. Anyway, now you know why I loathe bases. but I want to stay practical, and bases are important, so I can't just ignore them either. So what am I going to do about it? Let me add these two veterans to my force. Wonderful. Though it looks like something's missing from all of them. No points for stating the obvious, cause I haven't done any of their bases yet. So how can I get a bunch of their bases done quickly but uniquely? Well, for starters, I'm actually going to use the Ratman bases from one-page rules. I haven't really showed off the fact that each army comes with unique bases yet, so now's a good time. These printed bases are kind of a miracle to lazy basers like me, because as long as I can get it on the build plate, I don't have to worry about things like sand and glue to give me a nice texture for the ground level. It's already there. And all the other stuff on it, I can just focus on painting instead of building. But since there's only 5 different patterns and I'm already up to more than 5 miniatures, it means I'm going to want to do something in order to make repeats a little bit different from each other. And I think I've got an idea for a system on how to do it. First thing I want to do is get these in such a way that I can get to them all at once without having to switch between the holders. So I'm grabbing my sticky tack, the back of my red grass wet palette with a flat top, and those bases to start arranging them into a grid on the lid. Each base gets a little bit of sticky tack in the bottom and then stuck to the lid. The important part here is the arrangement is going to be that I don't have similar bases side by side. It'll be important later for making sure they look different from each other, which is the whole goal. Once I've got my grid, it should be an easy prime. I'm going to do it in different colors, but I always start with a tack coat, so I'll give it one of those in black just before getting to For the actual priming, I want to vary the colors of certain areas over this grid. This would help make things look a little different. My army colors are red and yellow, and I would like to keep them harmonious with that. So on my palette, I have Pyrrole red, yellow oxide, and a niche in between with orange from Chimera color. For each one, I'm going to add some black to my airbrush first and just mix in each color. I'll start with the red since I think it'll be the most harmonious with the rat scheme, giving the grid a streak through the middle in a little wave pattern and along the corners and edges a bit, giving me 2 tracks in the middle for the other colors. For the orange, it's a bit of a psych out because mixed with black it's just going to look brown, but that's totally fine of course. It'll just be a more natural brown between red and yellow browns like the umbers. I'll pick one edge of each strip to paint a line of this brown with. Last is the yellow. Because the black is blue tinted, it'll actually come out a little green. Again, I'm going for color variation, so this is what I expected. But the strength of the yellow oxide means it won't get too green and cover really well. Using this just to finish all the unpainted parts now. The next step is filled with lazy, but not too much. The first lazy step is I'm just going to use a premixed gray. Can't even be bothered to combine black and white now. Then breaking out my cheap makeup brush, I'm going to give them detail and texture with a soft dry brush. This is where I'm not going to be lazy and go hard, but just take it slow and easy with soft strokes across all the bases back and forth, not pushing the brush into them, but letting it dust back and forth over them. It's gonna take a lot of passes, and so for once I might actually not say anything and just let this play. Just kidding. Just to make sure the brush isn't catching from one side or the other, I'll start to circle around too. Still softly though. Now if I was really not feeling it, I'd just stop there. But for the sake of being a little extra, let's do a bit more. First order will be to fill in some of the extra details with the colors that they are. We've got some cheese on a few of these that I'll paint the same cheese colors I was doing on the rats themselves. These miscellaneous blades I'll give some sharper highlights with white, but also make the guards yellow with a glaze. The wood planks on one of these motifs need to look like wood again, so just a glaze for them too of that brown I made with the orange and black. And the 2 bases with gravel rather than stone, I think I want to make just a little bit different from the stonework. So I'll give them a wash of the red and black to turn the gray more earthy again. Once all the bits are done, I just want to give these one last little polish, and it doesn't take too long since it's the airbrush doing the work, but can really add that last little je ne sais quoi to a base. The basics are I take a bunch of thin medium and add just a tiny bit of one of my beginning colors, without the black this time, and I'm just going to pick out one of the centers between 4 of the bases and give that area a tint of color. By the time I've done it with all 3 of the colors, each of the bases should have a couple of color tinted areas and some not touched at all, which should give those repeat bases some more variation between them. For the last painting step, that's when I actually pull them off the lid to paint around the rim. Now I prefer black, but honestly a darker shade of whatever the main color is works too. I actually don't mind the rims having a bit of color as long as it isn't the exact shade as the top, because then they just end up looking like little hills. But a darker shade can look nice and still blend in. When it comes to basing, I'm also a super fan of all the pre-made basing materials. In this case, just some of these grass tufts, so I can add some different details to bases with the same sculpt. But rocks, leaves, or even 3D printed extras would be great additions to just glue on. Then glue the model on and it's over. The ordeal is finally over. Now my bases are a little dark, but that's on purpose. I want the rat to be the standout and the base to just be an accent. But going bright with this method can be fun too, and I've done that before on some of the demons bases. Just start with a lighter shade than I did. But for the look of a shadowy alley or dusky city, I think these work just fine. Please subscribe if you like this video, and check the link in the description to my Discord where I talk all sorts of nonsense about miniatures painting, provide critique on paint jobs, and occasionally stream.